It's such a huge privilege to be here today for me. This conference is, I believe, the most important conference happening in this country this year, possibly since our former president left office and our new president took office. There couldn't be a more important topic than othering and belonging. And I have the privilege of introducing essentially the spiritual father of that concept. And I could give you a traditional introduction, but it's in the conference brochure. I want to tell you a little about my relationship with John Powell. And again, I'm Tony Iton. I'm at the California Endowment, one of the senior vice presidents, and I used to be the Alameda County public health officer for a number of years. And I first met John in that capacity. I was asked to participate in it was a very unusual event. It was like a 3-day kind of brainstorming tour that was organized by an incredible faith-based organizing network in the Midwest called Isaiah. And they were working with SEIU on a series of equity-related issues around housing, around rapid transit, and they didn't have really a frame for talking about health and equity because they had been caught up really in a healthcare frame. So they invited me to come to Minnesota for several days to do a series of conversations with various different stakeholders, including politicians and faith leaders and community groups. And when I got there, there was this guy who was there as well, who looked vaguely familiar to me, and I couldn't quite tell how I knew him. But then I had this experience of listening to him. We went out and did some community conversations, and he got up there and he started talking, and I started to have that feeling that I knew I had felt before. It was this feeling of sort of being led in on deep truths in life, this feeling of like a series of rapid-fire epiphanies. And I thought, I know this guy from somewhere. And then it occurred to me, oh yeah, this is the guy from Race the Power of an Illusion. And we had shown that documentary series at the Alameda County Public Health Department, and I remember sitting there watching John Powell talking and thinking, who is this guy? He's blowing my mind. And so in that moment, being there in Minnesota, it all clicked. I was like, that's who it is. And I knew that I had to sit and learn as much as I possibly could from him in that moment. Now, here are some of the things that many of you will probably be familiar with that you have heard him say, but that have really profoundly triggered deep thinking and insights in my career and in my work. John has taught me about the difference between transactional and transformational, which is profound, and I'm going to touch on that in a minute. He's talked about this notion of broadening the empathetic space, to be able to communicate to people, first speak to them where they are, and then expand their sense of empathy so that they can see how others might be similarly or worse off. He's talked about the circle of human concern. He's talked about constructing whiteness, which was a concept for me that was so profound, the construction of whiteness, how it was put together, what it means. He's talked about the conflicts between public space and private space, and how some of our most important battles these days are really about trying to enlarge the public space. He's talked about black space and white space. He's talked about geography doing the work of Jim Crow laws, geography, segregation, which is so deeply embedded in our work at the California Endowment. He's talked about making the invisible visible, which is, I think, exactly the work that needs to happen. And of course, and certainly not least, he's talked about othering and belonging. Now, I could tell you that John Powell is a civil rights lawyer. I could tell you he's an activist. I could tell you he's been a national leader against apartheid. I could tell you that he is one of our most important public intellectuals in this country and supremely important in this moment. But instead, I want to tell you a story that John told me. I've had the privilege of having him over to my house for dinner, and I've been to his home, and I've heard him tell this story, and it's particularly resonant for me. John grew up in a religious household. His father was very religious, in fact, was a minister. And John remembers at a relatively young age standing up in church when people were asked, about the questions that they had. And he asked a deep, fundamental question. He said, there are 1 billion people in China, and they're not Christian. Are they going to go to hell? And he was very unsatisfied with the answer that he got, which led him to step away from the church. I think the irony of that is that I consider John to be now a spiritual leader and a prophet, and I consider myself to be one of his disciples. So at the California Endowment, one of the things that we're trying to do is to get to the deep truth around what is health. And John has helped us in so many ways. I want to conclude by telling you a little bit about ABC. A stands for agency or power, and we believe that power is critical to health. John has taught us that it's not just power, it's also healing, and the ability to create space, create time for people to actually heal and to grow into their power in a healthy, healed way. B stands for belonging, which is, the subject of this conference. And after listening to John for many years talk about belonging, I realized belonging is pretty much the opposite of racism. It's the spirit of being seen, being heard, being appreciated in your full humanity. And John has taught us so much about that. And then the C stands for changing conditions, which at its root is the difference between transformational work and transactional work. So John has had a profound impact on my work, on the work of the California Endowment, and I want to just conclude by reminding us of that famous quote from Che Guevara, who said that the true revolutionary is guided by a great feeling of love. John Powell is a true revolutionary. Please welcome John Powell to the stage.
It's wonderful to be here, although I feel like after Tony's introduction, I should grab my disciple, and we should head out. We all need each other, and we all have each other. So Tony has actually been an incredible thought partner, funder, friend, leader. They say oftentimes when you describe someone, you're actually talking about your own qualities. And so many of the things Tony said, I think, are really apropos to him. And I'm just blessed to have friends like Tony and partners like the California Endowment, but also partners and friends and family like you. So we're going to be talking a little bit today more about belonging and othering. And I want to start by just having you say good morning to each other. So some of you know this term, Sabawanu, I can't say it well, Sabawanu, which is a South African term. Sabona. And I was reading about it this morning, and there are many interpretations, but one interpretation is that I see you. And in the reading, it was saying a deeper meaning is that the God in me sees the God in you. And the response, which I won't try to say in Zulu, is I am here. So I want to just turn to the person next to you, greet them by saying good morning and telling them that you see them. And we know from this term, and we know from Haben yesterday, how many of you were here to see Haben yesterday? So we know that seeing is not something you necessarily do with your eyes, it's something you do with the heart and the soul. So it's important to see each other. In fact, another rendition of the South African phrase is that until I'm seen, I'm not here. So we need each other. We belong to each other. And yet, there are people in the world and processes in the world that actually refuse to see us, refuse to see people or see them only as the other, see them as different than, see them as less than, see them as a threat. And this process, which we call othering, and it's a process, is actually sweeping the globe right now. And it's being expressed in terms of right-wing authoritarianism, in terms of white nationalism, in terms of some process that says those people, and they could be gays, trans, lesbians, they could be women, they could be Native people, they could be blacks, they could be Muslims, they could be people with disabilities. To say in some way, those people are not fully human. Those people don't belong. We actually don't see them in their full humanity. And it's not just a word, it's a story. And out of that story comes a whole set of practices, building walls, locking people up, segregating kids in schools, not funding people. And not only can the person not be healthy in this situation, but the nation and the world cannot be healthy. So this process of othering is really the threat in the 21st century, and it's sweeping the globe. And it's not just not seeing people. It's not just othering people. It's othering animals. It's othering the planet. The planet becomes just a factory for us to exploit. So before we get too far into it, I want to give you sort of the academic, although I call myself a pracademic. I want to give you the academic definition of othering. So othering happens at different levels. It can happen between two people, and that's hurtful. It can happen institutionally, when you have a building where people in a wheelchair can't get in the building, then we're structurally othering those people. We're saying they don't belong here. And even if we pick up the wheelchair and bring them in, we've actually denied part of their humanity. So there are different ways in which we other. But when othering is done by the government, when othering is done by the most powerful in society, when othering is done by people who control the police, who control the military, it has a different valence. So othering is a problem wherever it happens, but it's not the same. There is a power dynamic to othering that we have to pay attention to. So there are two competing visions or stories that are emerging in the world today, and they've already been there, but now they're taking on sharper relief. And one story is a story about a smaller and smaller we that's hierarchical, that's based in fear, that's based in control, that's based in exploitation. And we hear this coming from the White House, we hear it coming from parts of India, we hear it coming from the Philippines, this notion that only we, some small notion of we, count. Also sort of wrapped in this dialogue, in this narrative, is this small we is supposed to be pure. White purity. Some of you have heard me talk about this before. So think about this. In the United States context, and it's different as we move around the world, different people do it differently. Sometimes it's you don't have the right number of cows. Sometimes it's you talk differently than I do. In the United States, we tried to do it based on blood. And so we said, it's important to be white. said, what the hell is white? Well, if you have one drop of black blood, whiteness is destroyed. And I jokingly say, you know, black blood is some really powerful stuff. But then, you know, there's no such thing as black blood. Really what we're talking about is the fragility of whiteness. And the reason whiteness is so fragile is because it's a fiction based on another fiction of purity. And we need to help remove that fiction. There is no pure people. We're all people. We all belong to each other. We're literally mixed up in each other. I don't know how people think some people left Africa early before other people, and on the way out, they left all the African blood. I don't think it works that way. The other vision is an expanding we, where we share with each other. We share the earth, we share our dreams, and we learn to care and even love each other in our similarities and in our difference. So one is an expanding we, what I call the circle of human concern that Tony made reference to. The other one is a contracting we, where we start to kick people out the circle. You don't belong, you don't belong, you don't belong. And those visions are competing with each other across the globe. And they're not just different visions, there are different concepts of we. So this is a spiritual journey, as well as a political journey, as well as a cultural journey. Do we see each other? Can we connect with each other? And the othering process doesn't happen just around one axis. Sometimes we talk about intersectionality, so there are several things happening at once. And the way one country other will be very different than the way another country other. So she may be in the audience, and I talk about my family a lot, but my daughter went to Spain to do some work on homelessness. And she said, you know, we group people, we other them, and so I'm looking for the people in Spain that get othered because of who they are. And she was talking to some of her liberal colleagues, and they said, we have no such people in Spain. We don't do that in Spain. You're confusing Spain with the United States. And she said, what about the Romas? Oh, those people. Yeah, they don't count. So they had been so removed from the consciousness, from the circle of human concern, that people forgot that they were people. And sometimes we think the way to deal with othering is saming. I don't see race. I don't see disability. We're all the same. A mosque is just like a church, is just like a synagogue. And while that's purported to be, from a liberal space, be more welcoming, is still erasing who we are. And it reminds me of James Baldwin. Some of you may know that at the height of his literary career, he was invited into high literary circles, and these things matter to him. And as they invited James Baldwin in, they said, come on in, Mr. Baldwin. We finally recognized that you can write. And Baldwin was happy. And he said, but don't bring your riffraff, meaning other black people, with you, and you don't have to rub it in our face that you're gay. And James Baldwin said, no thanks. And he instead wrote a book called The Price of the Ticket. And he was saying, the price of belonging, the price of joining was too high. I'm not going to join by committing existentialist suicide. Belonging has consequences, And othering has consequences. And we see this all around us. So we're here in Oakland, and some of you know about the famous barbecue where a black person, a black family goes to a park and a white woman is like, "What you doing in Oakland barbecuing? Get out of my space." Or where a black student, woman in Yale, is studying and somebody calls the police on her. We call it learning while black. Or we have the whole meme of Black Lives Matter, because every day the police, the schools, housing authorities tell us that black lives don't matter. So not belonging, being othered, has serious consequences. And those consequences are literally a matter of life and death. And belonging means more than just having access. It means something much more profound than that. It's a variation of King's beloved community. There was a variation of someone else's beloved community, so we learn from each other. I work at the Haas Institute for a Fair and Inclusive Society at UC Berkeley. And we have a wonderful staff, and they're bringing you this conference, and you hear more from them, Rochelle and others. But we're changing our name. Haas Institute for a Fair and Inclusive Society. It sounds pretty good. So why are we changing our name? So when you look at this slide, it will help you see this. So you have exclusion, which is obviously an extreme form of othering. And then you have inclusion. And sometimes people think of inclusion in the same way the people who invited James Baldwin in. That is, you can come in, but this is my house, this is my party, so behave yourself. You're a guest. Whether it's coming into Berkeley or whether it's coming into a hospital, the rules, the norms, the expectations are already set. And so what's the thing that you're joining? The thing that you're joining, the institution, the structure, the culture, oftentimes have profound biases already in place. And you're asked to come in and join and be quiet. Don't bring the riffraff with you. Say, I am the riffraff. So belonging is not simply joining something. Belonging is about co-creating the thing you're joining. And in order to co-create, you need power. So it's not your house or my house. It's not your city or my city. It's our city. We co-create it. We make it together with all of our complexities and dreams. And that's a very different process. So we haven't decided our new name yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if belonging is not part of the name. So inclusion is not enough. So belonging not only affects how we perceive things, it affects who we are. I am because you are. So what happens if you're not? What happens if you don't see me? What happens if you just view me? It has serious health consequences, serious political consequences, seriously democratic consequences, not just for me not being seen, but for you. This is 2019. 2019 is the 400th year since slaves were brought to the United States. They were brought not as people. They were brought as property, as other. And this process of enslaving people and denying people their humanity didn't just define what was happening with slaves and the enslaved people actually revolted, it defined America. It defined our institutions. It defined our structures. It defined our culture. And Toni Morrison made the observation that there are all these studies now about the trauma to black people of slavery, which is real. But she says we haven't looked at enough what this has done to white people, what this ideology of superiority and separateness has done to white people. And I always make the point that whiteness, in its most pernicious form, is a serious problem. But that's not the same as people who are phenotypically white, unless they adopt that ideology. And so one of the things we want to do is help free people, help free the world of the ideology of hierarchy, dominance, which is closely associated in the United States with whiteness. And it's not an easy process because it's so embedded in our culture, in our language, in our words. But that's not all that's embedded. The aspiration to connect, the aspiration to see each other, the aspiration to love is also there. So this is the challenge. What story will we live in? What story will we tell? What world will we live in? Will we have a world to live in? Some of you may have seen this. This is a study that came out of UT Austin. They had a situation down there where black and Latino students, they would bring them in and they wouldn't graduate, or it'd take them twice as long to graduate. And they spent millions of dollars trying to remediate these students. It's like, well, you went to a bad school, we understand that. You didn't properly learn, so we're gonna spend money to make sure you get it. And it didn't work. And then in this story, the young woman, her mother said, well, you know what, maybe UT Austin is just too hard. Maybe you need to go to a community college. And then one of the professors called the students together and said, what is it like being here at UT Austin? And if you haven't been there, I'll just say it's a beautiful campus. They actually invited me down to consider starting an institute, teaching school. They offered me a lot of money for a faculty position. And as we're walking around the campus, we see Confederate memorabilia all over the place. General Lee, and if one of my hosts turns to me and says, don't pay attention to all that federal memorabilia. We fought on the side of the South in the Civil War. And he was a nice enough guy. And so I was nice to him. But I can tell you, my unconscious was saying, get the hell out of here, what are you doing? And so I knew that the students were experiencing the same thing. The point is that when they started talking about it, when it came out, when they stopped suppressing it, the black students and Latino students started doing so well that researchers said somebody was cooking the books. They're not that smart. That's not possible. The problem wasn't they had lack of knowledge. The problem was they didn't belong. And as soon as they had a sense of belonging, they started performing. Not only were they better off academically, they were better off in terms of their health as well. And we see this over and over again. So when we talk about bathrooms, this may seem like a small thing, but these symbols are important. They say you belong or you don't belong. You're human or you're not human. So what we call, in this case, Younger is calling modern society, is really Western society. That is, we've forgotten that we belong to each other. We've forgotten that we belong to the earth. And we had our native brothers here at the beginning of the conference trying to remind us to reconnect or to acknowledge our connections. Not just so the earth can heal, but that so we can heal as well. So who are we? And who are we becoming? And in this right-wing authoritarian movement, we're told to always go back to the past because America was great at some mythical time in the past. And we want to go back there. And this is what Samuel Huntington is talking about. And Jeff Chang, who you heard from yesterday, is saying, no, we are great because of the future we're building together. So it's not who were we, it's who will we be? Who are we becoming? And all of you become a bridge, become an author of that future. All of us participate as midwives. So the world is changing, and it's changing very fast. And that creates anxiety about who we are and about our place on the earth. And that's something that all of us are feeling. But there's more than one way of dealing with that. One way of dealing with it, and it's done largely through stories and leaders, is to say, it's too scary that, technology is changing, there's globalization, there's climate change, there's all these people who actually eat different food than me, who talk differently than me, who maybe approach God differently than me. I don't like it. And so one response is to say, let's go back to the past. In the United States, what that means is, let's go back to the past when white men dominated, when white rich men dominated. Samuel Huntington says, the country is not a country of immigrants, it's a country of settlers. And he says the settlers were not simply white. He said there were two groups of people who settled this country. They're called the Anglos and the Saxons. So if you're German, you don't fit. If you're Italian, you don't fit. He says the Anglos and the Saxons, they were also English speaking, they were also Protestants. So if you're a Catholic, you don't fit. So his we is getting smaller and smaller. And he's saying these settlers own this place. Everybody else is a guest. And it's interesting when Huntington says this, because what happened to the native people? What happened to the Ohlone? I thought they were already here. They don't exist in the imagination of Samuel Huntington. So part of the story then is about, can we go back? Can we have this small, narrow we? And all these people coming to our shores is a threat. I was just in England recently, and I'm going back in a week or so, and I say, if you want to see Egyptian art, you don't go to Egypt, you go to London. So, I have this image of going to the border and having someone from the Border Patrol. Here comes an avocado to the border. Here comes some cantaloupe to the border. And we say, come on in. But here comes the farmer that grew the avocado and that grew the cantaloupe, and we say, you can't come in. So we're taking stuff from all over the world, but telling people, you have to stay put. We're disrupting systems and climates all over the world, and then saying, you have to stay put. We're taking oil from the Middle East, but telling the people in the Middle East, your oil can come, but you can't come. We're taking minerals from Africa and saying, we need your minerals to build cell phones, but we don't need your people. So we have this global consumption, and at the same time, we're trying to shut the door on people. And when the people try to follow their stuff, then they become the problem. So that's one story. But the other story is that we are becoming a vastly, deeply connected people. I can see what's happening in Egypt today on my cell phone. I can travel on a plane and in a short period of time be in Brazil. So the world is becoming smaller, and we belong to each other. So these are the two visions. How do we actually have a world in which we all belong? And what I've been talking about is something called breaking and bridging. And the third is bonding. The idea of bonding is that I care about my group, but I'm not disparaging other groups. We need to have bridges. We need to make more bridges. But instead, white nationalists are telling us to break, telling us to separate. We saw what happened in New Zealand. And we saw the tragedy happen there, but we also saw the beauty of the prime minister in the country basically saying, all these people, whether they're Christian, Muslims, Jews, they are the we. They are part of us. There's a bar in Tel Aviv that if you come in as a Jewish person with a Palestinian person, you get 50% off the cost of your food. We can actually develop projects, stories, expressions of belonging. We can actually build bridges. We can celebrate those bridges. But it's not easy. And there are hard bridges and soft bridges. There are hard breaking and soft breaking. And in terms of building bridges, there's short bridges and long bridges. And I'm almost at the end, but let me just say this. When we talk about bridging, and I know I'm covering a lot of territory, and you're going to be talking about some of this hopefully the rest of the conference and beyond. But a short bridge is a bridge maybe with your cousin. A short bridge might be between a Latino and African American, or African American Latino. A short bridge might be between a lesbian and a trans. Even groups who are very close sometimes still need to build bridges. A short bridge might be with one aspect of yourself to another aspect of yourself. We actually break with ourselves and not just with each other. Now, long bridge maybe is someone who's ideologically a long way from you. So I always say to people, because when they hear about bridging, it's like, I always quote my friend, Pastor Mike. He says, he's a pastor. And when I was talking to him about bridging, he says, do I have to bridge with the devil? And my response was, don't start there. But we have to be careful also who we call the devil. But don't go to your most difficult bridge, go to your shorter bridges. Learn to bridge. But as we learn to bridge, bell hooks remind us that bridges are made to walk on. So it's not easy work. And those who have power, in a sense, have more capacity to bridge. But all of us need to participate in this. All of us actually need to reach out acts of kindness and to tell and to show that we belong to each other. And I'm going to end with this video, and then I'm going to introduce the panel so we can show the video. It's showing on my screen, but it's not showing up here.
We don't have audio.
And there's no,
We need to start over, no audio.
and there's no audio. So you might have to see this later, but I'll just tell you it's really cool. But not nearly as cool as you are. So we will show you this later. Some of you may have already seen it, but it's just a video explaining bridging and breaking and the role of anxiety in our society today. And with that,
of all the forces shaping politics and power around the world, perhaps none are more important than our sense of who we are and who we are becoming. We are in a period of accelerated change in at least 4 areas: globalization, technology, the environment, and demographic change. We can only process so much change in a short period of time without experiencing anxiety, which is a normal biological reaction. But how we respond to this anxiety is social. Our response is greatly shaped by the stories presented by leadership and through culture. These stories speak to our deepest values and our core beliefs about who we are, many of which operate at the subconscious level. We can respond to these changes either as a threat or as an opportunity. The first response is breaking. The second is bridging. Breaking can create a deep fear of other groups, making it easier to accept false stories of us versus them. Breaking perpetuates isolation, hardens racism, and builds oppressive systems, while driving our politics and institutions toward anti-democratic and inhumane practices. The other response is bridging, which calls on us to imagine a larger, more inclusive we. When we bridge, we see demographic change and our diverse identities as positive and enhancing who we are. Bridging calls on us to engage in healthy dialogue and requires us to listen deeply. Bridging does not mean abandoning your identity. Bridging means acknowledging our shared humanity, rejecting that there is a them, and moving toward a future where there is instead a new us. But when we bridge, we not only open up to others, we also open up to changes within ourselves, where we can participate in creating a society built on belonging. Of all the forces shaping politics.
So thank you. So just one other comment, then I'll bring up the panel. So in today's discourse, you hear a lot about identity politics. Is it hurting us? Is it helping us? I don't have time to go into great detail, but the issue is not identity politics. The issue is breaking politics. We actually all have identities, and right now the most pernicious identity politics that's happening right now in the United States is white nationalism, white superiority, white supremacy. But we're not asking people to give up their identity, but to use your identity to bridge and empathetically engage with others. We can do that with our identity. We can actually belong and still be, maybe not James Baldwin, but a good writer, a good person, and live in a diverse world. So with that, let me welcome up our next panel. I want to welcome up